Whenever you're ready.
My name is Asher Ireland, and I will be performing Saving the Fur Seal, Conflict and Compromise in International Wildlife Conservation. Madam President, every day we witness conflicts that pit business and our need for resources against our environment. Often we think we must choose one side, yet turning to history, compromise is possible. Therefore, I rise today to urge my colleagues to consider the little-known story of the northern fur seal and the landmark compromise that allowed for their protection and preservation. A saga that began with our purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867. Russia ceded territory that included the Pribilof, or Seal Islands. By the 1880s, the fur seal industry was one of the world's most profitable. Sealers competed for valuable pelts and access to rookeries, or breeding areas that were the most opportune and sustainable places to harvest seals. Conflict arose between the four sealing nations, Japan, Russia, the US, and Great Britain, as populations declined. The conflict between the need for fur seal protection and the economic benefits derived from its pelt was further complicated by the boundaries of international waters and national jurisdiction. Eventually, the North Pacific Fur Seal Convention of 1911 found a compromise between the survival of the species and the industry. But before this successful compromise, the Bering Sea Tribunal of Arbitration in 1893 was an early attempt to resolve the conflict. But it failed because arbitrators lacked adequate scientific knowledge. To correct this, in 1896, the US Department of Commerce hired David Starr Jordan, a renowned ichthyologist and president of Stanford University, to document the seal's decline. 16 volumes filled with information and discussion about the northern fur seal conflict. Yet the Tribunal of Arbitration could not reach a real compromise. You see, in the northern hemisphere, there were only a handful of fur seal rookeries, none in British territory. This led sealers from Canada, still part of Britain, to kill seals in the open waters of the Bering Sea, a method called pelagic sealing. Pelagic sealers decimated fur seal herds. They killed a disproportionate number of females who were both nursing and pregnant, in effect killing 3 seals with every shot. The seals killed in the open water often sank before they could be harvested, meaning no profit for the hunters. And because these seals hauled out solely on American territory, the US claimed the Canadians were acting illegally. In the face of such wanton waste, and to protect its own industry, the US government was forced to seize all pelagic sealing vessels, foreign and domestic. The British were incensed by this drastic US response. The Tribunal of Arbitration attempted to find compromise by ruling that the Canadians could not hunt within 60 miles of the Pribilofs, but to not apply this rule to the other pelagic sealing nations. While technically a compromise, it was far from the multilateral agreement needed to protect the seals. So in the late 1890s, I was chosen to investigate their continued decline. 4 years after the tribunal, I recorded 21,750 dead pups on the islands, starved, without milk from their murdered mothers. Backed with scientific data, I attempted to resolve the conflict with the British Foreign Minister, Lord Salisbury. But talks failed upon an invasion of Japanese sealers into the Bering Sea. Madam President, the Tribunal of Arbitration failed to stop the decline of the northern fur seal because it let the interests of Great Britain and the sealing industry prevail in a conflict with conservation. Following the compromise, the US remained willing to negotiate for seal preservation. And by the turn of the century, Russia was also willing to discuss protections, with their seal population declining. However, it took until the end of the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, when Japan gained a sizable seal herd of its own, for them to see the advantages of compromise. By this point, the northern fur seal was almost commercially extinct, bringing the Canadians to the table as well. The four nations deliberated over a treaty drafted by artist Henry Wood Elliott, who spent time on the Pribilofs and had witnessed the seal's decline. In 1872, I sketched this beach on St. Paul Island. As you can see, it was full of seals. But 18 years later, in 1890, I sketched the same beach. Nothing but rocks. I had been sent to the Pribilofs to record the seal harvest for the Treasury Department, and I was appalled to witness the devastating effects of on-land and pelagic sealing, which threatened these amazing animals with extinction. Despite attempts to compromise, the conflict remained unresolved. A dispute with David Jordan over the effects of on-land harvesting left me at odds with President Roosevelt and Congress. This led me to engage the press with my sketches in hopes of swaying the public opinion of the sealing crisis. I also collaborated with the Secretary of State, John Hay, author of many compromises, to craft the Hay-Elliott Treaty. But when in 1905, Hay suffered an untimely death, Congress had become so frustrated with me that they refused to even look at the legislation. Well, with every season that passed, the seal herd became noticeably smaller. In 1907, I enlisted the help of conservationist William Hornaday of the Campfire Club of America, whose reputation and political clout gave him the best chance to convince the Senate to approve the treaty. Then, in 1910, with the seals on the brink of extinction, the support of Senator Joseph Dixon and President Taft gave the treaty a new chance in just the nick of time. We negotiated to give Japan and Canada each 15% of our seal harvest every year for their cooperation. A solution was only possible when we made it more profitable for the other countries to compromise than to continue sealing. The final treaty accomplished my goal of protecting the seals and David Jordan's goal of prohibiting pelagic sealing. Article 1 of the treaty proclaims, "The high contracting powers mutually and reciprocally agree that their citizens and subjects respectfully, and all persons subject to their laws and treaties, and their vessels, shall be prohibited while this convention remains in force from engaging in pelagic sealing in the waters of the North Pacific Ocean." The treaty required that all sealing would halt if the population dropped below a specific threshold, but it gave each nation control of its respective seal populations. In Article 4, Hay and I wrote that it is further agreed that the provisions of this convention shall not apply to Indians, Ainos, Aleuts, or other aborigines dwelling on the coast of the waters mentioned in Article 1, in the way hitherto practiced and without the use of firearms. In July of 1911, we were successful in getting the treaty passed and ratified by all four nations. Madam President, the northern fur seal conflict was resolved by a compromise that stood until Japan announced its termination before entering World War II. However, following the war, a new fur seal treaty was signed, giving lasting protection to the seals. The convention continues to serve as a model for successful compromise in conservation, setting the legal and political foundation for the Marine Mammal Protection Act, Endangered Species Act, and other critical pieces of environmental law. Yet even today, Madam President, albeit in different forms, this same conflict continues to resurface. The conflict between the needs of industry and the protection of the environment. We must continue to heed the words of David Jordan, who wrote to President Roosevelt saying, "We have, as civilized Americans, a duty to see that Mother Earth is not robbed of these noble animals, which can never be replaced. Nor, Madam President, can we forget our businesses." I yield back. Thank you.